The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, a Counterintuitive Approach to Living a Good Life by Mark Manson. Chapter 1. Summary. Manson begins his guidance by pointing out that one of the most common mistakes that people make is to fixate solely on the advantageous aspects of a situation. When we do this, we put ourselves in a situation where we keep reminding ourselves of the things that we are missing. The feedback loop that has been nicknamed the feedback loop from hell also heavily involves the use of social media. We are constantly being bombarded with photographs and videos on social media that show the ideal life of others, and as a result, we start longing to achieve everything that they have already accomplished. We need to put some boundaries on the things that genuinely matter to us in order to break this cycle of destructive behavior. This does not mean that we should become indifferent people. Rather, it means that we should sort our experiences into those that will matter in a few years and those that won't matter in the future. By engaging in all of these activities, we will be able to free ourselves from the clutches of modern society, which compels us to have the urge to transform into someone that we are not. Acceptance of who we are leads to greater success in the long run than striving to emulate the characteristics of a person we look up to or admire. Analysis. In light of what the author wants the readers to take away from the content of the book, we are able to draw the conclusion that the author views the route of seeking only happy experiences as a path fraught with danger. This is primarily due to the fact that when we are experiencing these cravings, our only concentration is on the results of the situation, and we completely ignore the learning stage, which actually represents the end aim. The same thing happens when we allow ourselves to become overly invested in minor matters. According to Manson, we ought to pretend that the number of things that trouble us is restricted and that we have to arrange everything in descending order of importance. By acting in this manner, we will be able to avoid becoming another victim of the commercial industry, which will attempt to persuade us that we have an urgent requirement for all of their goods so that they can sell them to us and feed us with them. Chapter 2. Summary. The author emphasizes in the second chapter that there is a connection between joy and suffering by pointing out that there is a link between the two. To begin, it is essential to bear in mind that joy is in no sense a mathematical equation that can be solved. Rather, the experience of joy is a whole procedure. When we try to save ourselves from experiencing loss and grief, all we do is sidestep the sensation of bliss that we so much want. In every possible way, suffering is considered to be a valuable component. When we are younger, it instills in us the habit of paying closer attention, and when we are older, it guides our decisions in the proper path. There is a good reason why people think of life as a never-ending sequence of issues that can be solved. We are able to experience a brief period of relief and contentment if we are successful in resolving one of the challenges we are contending with, but this state only lasts until we encounter another obstacle. If there were no difficulty, then there would be no satisfaction in the end result. The ascent itself, rather than the destination itself, is the source of the delight that this civilization seeks. It is not the destination itself. Analysis. Within these pages, Manson endeavors to persuade us that there is a meaning to our anguish. We are motivated to make adjustments when we are forced to experience discomfort. It is commonly believed that experiencing discomfort is essential to the development process. In the same way, this also applies to feelings. They are biological cues that have the function of directing us through this labyrinth of unknowns and potential outcomes. Despite this, we should not give them the power to dictate the course of our lives because their main directive is to steer us in the proper direction. It is not their place to choose our next move. On the basis of all of this information, by the time we reach the end of the chapter, we ought to be able to comprehend the potential outcomes that can result from leaving problems unaddressed. Negative feelings are often interpreted as the body's method of calling for action due to this reason. We shouldn't strive to escape them because doing so would only lead to feelings of unhappiness. On the other hand, we ought to make an effort to discover answers to all of the challenges we face and be ready to surmount the challenges that follow after them. Chapter 3. Summary. Because of the way that life is structured, the vast majority of us are just average at the vast majority of the activities in which we partake. To become extraordinary demands an investment of time, which is a luxury that many of us do not have. As a consequence of this, the vast majority of us wind up being the same, while only a select few are able to rise to the top. In spite of all of these, we are given films and photographs of successful individuals by the media, which leads us to believe that we are unique despite the fact that we are not. After that, we started considering ourselves to be distinct from the other members of the group, and because of this, we demanded to be given preferential treatment. Some people have a tendency to view themselves as major failures, while others are at the opposite end of the spectrum and are unable to accept the possibility that they are not as significant as they believe they are. Both scenarios will, in the end, force us to avoid finding solutions to problems because we will convince ourselves that either it is not our responsibility to do so or that we do not have the abilities necessary to do so. Because of this, everyone who worked on building high self-esteem classes found success, despite the fact that subsequent studies demonstrated that the outcome is very different from what we anticipated. In spite of the fact that the internet was successful in providing us with the freedom that we desired in terms of the manner that we express ourselves, it also managed to construct a virtual jail for us in which we are incarcerated because of our desire to be someone else. Analysis. Manson continues to make his point on the ways in which the internet may have a negative impact on our life. The internet is flooded with messages claiming that everyone is special in their own way and that they all have equal rights to be at the top of the hierarchy. As a consequence of all of these factors, we are raised to believe that we have the right to an approach that is unique from that of others. We no longer think of ourselves as average people, rather, we regard ourselves as people who are either exceptional or deplorably average. According to the author's personal experiences, coming to terms with the fact that we are all fundamentally the same will, in time, bring about a sense of comfort. In order to maintain good mental health, we need to be truthful with ourselves and acknowledge that there are certain universal facts. All of these things will set you on the right path, and you will also be able to let go of the pressure that comes with the need to succeed, which is another benefit of doing so. Even though it can be painful to admit that you will not make an impact in the world, doing so will put you on the right path. The fact that we are not the only ones going through challenging times is brought to light by mediocrity, which should not be viewed as a flaw, but rather as a quality rather than a defect. Chapter 4. Summary. In the fourth chapter, Manson opens our eyes and tries to convince us that the goal is not to dodge pain, but rather to embrace it and examine its hidden meaning. He says this in an effort to show us that we have been looking for the wrong thing. Whenever we are confronted with an issue, in order to discover a solution to that problem, we need to first modify our values and the way that we assess success and failure. Only then can we hope to find a solution. To be more specific, certain values and measures have a tendency to be better suited than others for approaching a particular circumstance. We shouldn't put this book away until we have determined that the values that are considered to be positive are those that are based on reality, can be controlled, and, despite this, improve our social life. We shouldn't put this book away until we have determined that the values that are considered to be positive are those that are an excellent illustration of this is the aspiration to rise to the position of most popular member of the group, which is often regarded as a trait that should be avoided because it is impossible to predict how the others would react to our actions in this regard. Manson additionally categorizes common values according to the kind of problems that are caused by them on the basis of these affirmations. Problems that are difficult to solve are typically brought on by weak values, such as the pursuit of pleasure and money success, the need to always be right, and an unwavering commitment to positivity. When we are dealing with weak values, we are actually expanding our limited quantity of caring on things that don't matter, and once again we are caught in a cycle of failing to prioritize the challenges we face. This happens whenever we are dealing with low values. Analysis. The author has a unique and engaging strategy for getting us to empathize with the information that he is passing on to us. Each of the sequences that are presented in this chapter begins with a tale that serves the purpose of better familiarizing us with the primary topic at hand. For instance, the first part of this chapter tells the story of Lieutenant Hiro Onoda, who stayed hidden in the woods for a number of years because he was certain that World War II was still going on. Because his internal morals indicated that he should remain loyal to the Emperor and challenge everything that the others had to say, he was willing to go through with all of the hardship. When he finally learned the reality and found out about a society that had lost its culture, he felt depressed because his beliefs had changed, and he understood that all of the pain had brought no benefits to the land that he held so dear. The story of a guitarist who was kicked out of the band is another one that has been told. In the end, he established the famous band that is now known as Megadeth and was able to attain the kind of success that most people only dream of. Even so, he was never content because the first band was Metallica, and he persistently compared his success to that of the other band, which served only to highlight the fact that he was unsuccessful. After going through these chapters, the most important thing for us to take away is the realization that whether something is a failure or a success depends on how it is measured. One person's setback might be another's opportunity for growth, and vice versa. Chapter 5, Summary. We have a chronic tendency to shirk our responsibilities and place the onus of bearing them squarely on the shoulders of those closest to us. What we fail to recognize, however, is the truth that taking responsibility for something actually gives us more power. It encourages the development of the constructive energy within us that we require in order to find solutions to the issues that we are currently facing. And as we recall from the chapters that came before this one, the answer to our predicaments is the key to the sensation of happiness that we are looking for. We are always looking for reasons to justify our actions, but we must not lose sight of the fact that, regardless of the specifics of the situation, it is ultimately our responsibility to determine what comes next. This is the defining characteristic that separates it from being a fault in the end. People generally consider fault to be an action that was done in the past, or a reflection of something that has already taken place. On the other hand, responsibility is something that happens in the here and now, and it is a direct result of the course of action that we are currently selecting. Just like in poker, some of us are dealt better cards at birth and have the ability to take greater risks than others, while others do not have the luxury of doing so. Despite this, it is their obligation to determine how best to deal with the issue they are facing. This explains why a problem might be regarded as being unpleasant when someone compels us to do something that we don't want to do, but it also explains why a difficulty can offer happiness when we assume full responsibility for the action. Analysis. Manson continues to center his attention, across these pages, on the idea that even when we are unaware of it, we are constantly making choices. The choice to take no action at all is likewise a sort of choice. As a consequence of this, we are entirely accountable for everything that takes place in our lives. When someone else hinders our progress, it is their fault that we are placed in this circumstance, yet, it is ultimately up to us to determine how we feel in relation to what has just transpired. Either we can make the decision to avoid any additional contact out of the fear that someone else will betray us, or we can reflect more on what produced the scenario and try to avoid it in the future by not doing what caused it in the first place. Any occurrence that takes place in our lives can be interpreted, on a simpler level, as a double-edged sword. It is up to us to decide whether we will utilize it as a tool or whether we will cut ourselves with it first. In principle, each of these appears to be extremely indisputable, yet, when it comes to practice, we may wonder how we may select the appropriate course of action. In order to accomplish this, it is necessary for us to alter our morals and metrics, which were covered in the chapter before this one by Manson. Instead of placing importance on something that won't improve our lives in any way, we should direct our attention to the things that are truly important and that can teach us valuable lessons. It still seems like an easy move, But when we find ourselves in a position where we have to make these changes, we will discover that doing so is quite challenging. It's possible that at first we'll feel like we've been dealt a bad hand, but in the end, the finest vintage will be the one that has stood the test of time. Chapter 6, Summary. The majority of publications on personal development are geared toward persuading readers that the only way to reach the paradisiacal condition of calm is to first become aware of who they are. Manson disagrees with that assertion in spite of all of the facts that have been shown in the media. He devoted a whole chapter to elucidating for us the allure of being oblivious to our own identities. To begin, we must recognize that our mind is a chaotic assortment of fallacies. All of these unknowns serve as the driving force behind development. We are usually incorrect, and the majority of the time we are in the wrong. It is not our job to choose the correct response. Rather, we should strive to be less incorrect than we have been in the past. Any event that occurs in our lives has the potential to either help us or harm us. We will never know what the results of an action will be until after it has already taken place. Because of this, presuming that our morals and values are impeccable can only result in the development of a sense of entitlement, which will, in the end, force us to avoid taking responsibility for our actions. When we concede the possibility that we are mistaken, we will be forced to adjust the way that we evaluate our experiences and the significance we place on our beliefs. According to the author's point of view, there are 3 inquiries that we need to make to ourselves in order to avoid falling into the pit of self-consumption. These inquiries are as follows. Can our ideas be wrong? What does it mean if the idea is wrong? And whether or not being wrong would make the problem better or worse. In a nutshell, the thing that we need to keep in mind is that the uncertainty that we are trying to hide from is not the evil that we are trying to hide from, and that we should try to embrace the uncertainty that we are trying to hide from in order to open the doors to a different perspective on the world. Analysis. Mark Manson keeps the readers up to date by relating more of his past experiences in an effort to help them gain a deeper comprehension of the lessons he is attempting to impart. The entirety of this chapter is filled with comparisons, such as comparing believing what our mind dictates to not believing what our mind dictates, as well as comparing being right to being incorrect. At the beginning of this chapter, he reiterates the fact that, for a long time, people believed that the earth is flat or that the earth rotates around the sun. It wasn't until they were finally able to come to terms with the fact that they were in the wrong that new opportunities presented themselves. In the same way, the same principle applies to our private lives. We need to accept the truth that our minds have a natural tendency to guard the opinions it has formed, since these are the only ones that we have personal experience with and are the only ones that we are able to comprehend. He tells us in a very elegant way that we are the architects of our own beliefs, and that once we are able to gain control of this latent ability that we all have, we will be able to have a better understanding of what truly matters, as well as what our morals and values ought to be. This is a very profound and thought-provoking statement. At the end of the chapter, he provides us with a few suggestions for how we can begin to have less conviction in the things that we believe. According to his point of view, the solution to this predicament lies in casting all of our thoughts and beliefs into doubt and calling them into question. Even though it may appear to be easy work to complete, we may be surprised to learn how much effort and how much practice is actually required in order to perfect it, despite the fact that it may appear to be an easy task. Chapter 7, Summary. We are continually exerting pressure on ourselves in an effort to prevent failing in any and every way. We have reached the point where failure is viewed as a catastrophic result that will assure that we will not be able to attain our ultimate aims. We have brought this situation to this degree. According to the author's point of view, one of the most important aspects of our life is learning to accept and even enjoy the fact that we have failed at something. We eventually become skilled enough to succeed after going through a process that involves several failures. There is another irritating cycle in these phrases because when we have a strong want and we are unable to achieve it, we have a tendency to give up on everything in order to prevent feeling that way again. Another misconception is that in order to participate in something, we first need to work up the motivation to do so. Regardless of this, Manson is of the opinion that this is more of a myth than it is fact. When we get started on something, we usually find that it inspires and motivates us more as we go along. In conclusion, if our goal is to be more motivated, the first step is to take action in that direction. It is possible to think of it as a chain in which, once an action has been initiated, it will stimulate the drive and inspiration that is necessary for additional activities. On the basis of all of these, we are able to come to the conclusion that the resolution itself is not really what matters, but rather, what matters the most is to actually do something. We will see that even failure will tend to assist you realize your dreams when your metric is to only do anything, so keep that in mind as you read this. Analysis. The entire chapter is centered on the concept that failing at anything does not automatically result in a negative outcome, and that there are times when experiencing discomfort might provide more growth opportunities than experiencing joy. The author continues to draw from his own experiences in order to encourage us to become more invested in his guidance and to bring his words to vivid life. Because he was frightened of failing and getting injured in the beginning, he characterizes himself as being a lout and a cheapskate. This is why he views himself as being this way. After he had finally conquered his anxiety issues, he was able to take advantage of some newly available chances. In spite of the fact that he is currently more effective than he was in the past, he insists that in order to hone this ability, a significant amount of effort and drive is necessary. When we create a goal, we invariably fail to take into account the fact that achieving a number of arbitrary milestones is not going to be the factor that ultimately leads to satisfaction. The possibility of improvement is what brings about happiness, and there is no way to achieve this level of development without first experiencing failure. In the end, we can reach a conclusion by asserting that the size of our achievements is directly proportional to the number of times we were unsuccessful in our lives. Chapter 8. Summary. We have a propensity to develop throughout our lives the conviction that freedom is the elusive treasure that, once discovered, will completely transform our understanding of the world. It's possible that this is more of a legend than it is a fact. This is due to the fact that freedom in and of itself is meaningless because there is nothing to turn away from. In order for us to be able to reject something, we need to first restrict our freedom, which, in theory, would mean that we would have less freedom rather than more of it. The mistake that a lot of people make is that they are continuously focused on saying yes and taking the responsibility for things that are not their fault. By doing so, we actually return to the first rule depicted in this book, which refers to accepting that we are not entitled to anything, and that, despite the fact that we might have better skills than others, in general, we are all mediocre. This rule states that we should accept that we are not entitled to anything and that we are all mediocre. When we accept everything, we are acknowledging that everything has the same amount of value for us, which transforms our lives into something that has no significance. Because of this, the only way that we will be able to determine what aspects of our lives should be prioritized and which ones we should disregard is if we eliminate some aspects of our lives. In spite of this, we can be surprised by the benefits that restricting our freedom could offer to us. There are times when aimlessly traveling the world without any particular destination in mind won't make us feel like the king and queen of the world, but rather like meaningless people wandering aimlessly around the earth. Analysis. The author is of the opinion that there is a significant connection between the things that we shun and who we are as individuals. In the end, what defines us is not only what we accept, but also what we refuse to accept. This means that if we avoid rejecting anything, this could be interpreted as avoiding any sort of conflict or confrontation, which ultimately leads to a very subtle form of entitlement. If we avoid rejecting anything, this could be translated as avoiding any form of conflict or confrontation. A sense of entitlement is a dangerous character flaw since it does not inspire a person's drive to improve themselves, as we learned in the chapter before this one. Manson also rejects the notion that liberty is the essential ingredient for contentment in one's life. This is due to the fact that when we speak to this situation, we are actually referring to a period in which we are overwhelmed with possibilities, and as a result, we end up suffering from what is commonly referred to as the paradox of choice. Because having more presents us with a greater number of options, we have a tendency to second-guess our decisions to turn down some of those opportunities. The illustration that is given in the book is the one that relates to having the opportunity to go to a country that is selected from a pool of 20 other potential destinations. In order to better present the practical application of this information, he reminds us of toxic relationships, which are based especially on the feeling of entitlement to solve the problem of the partner or blame the partner for any difficulties. By selecting this, we forfeit other options, which lead to the terrifying question, what if, that will haunt us for years. Chapter 9, Summary. When we contemplate our own mortality, we often picture it as a racetrack, at the end of which we will be required to tally up all of our accomplishments in order to evaluate whether or not our lives were truly meaningful. As a result of this, in Manson's opinion, death is the very essence of what life is. If there were no end, then everything, even the concept of ultimate freedom from the prior chapter, would be worthless. If there were no beginning, then nothing would have any significance. When we finally come to terms with the fact that we are going to die, we are able to rid our lives of all of the trifling concerns and activities that are ultimately meaningless to us. To be more specific, if we are able to comprehend that the amount of time we have is restricted, we have a tendency to improve our ability to prioritize different things. The freedom to concentrate only on those aspects of our lives that are truly important will, in the long run, bring us more fulfillment than the fleeting euphoria that comes with being preoccupied with trivial matters, such as the accumulation of material goods or the pursuit of a career in the public eye. Once we are ready to accept the reality that we will eventually pass away, we are able to enjoy our lives to the fullest. Analysis. The author makes reference to a book by Ernest Becker titled The Denial of Death in order to emphasize the significance of death in our lives and also to explain why we are so terrified of it. Becker's book was written in the 1960s. According to the anthropologist, there are two primary causes that comprise the basis of our fear in reference to the conclusion of our lives. The first type of fear is referred to as death terror, and it is brought on by the fact that we are able to put ourselves in hypothetical circumstances through our imagination. Because this is not a quality that can be found in other species, it might be said to be one of the features that distinguishes humans from other creatures. Despite this, the ability to visualize ourselves in a variety of settings inevitably results in a profound sort of worry. This is due to the fact that, despite the fact that there are a number of potential outcomes, we are unable to predict how things will turn out. The book also explains another explanation, which relates to several programs aimed at achieving immortality. Our awareness extends beyond the purely bodily aspect. This aspect is referred to as the mortal one, but in addition to that, there is a second self that is known as the conceptual self. There is a reason why so many of us have such a strong desire to see our names engraved on buildings and books. We know that doing so will ensure that our legacies will go on long after we are gone. This is the root cause of all the anxiety and the sensation that one is going to fail. We have a tendency to live for our projects of immortality rather than for ourselves, and as a consequence of this, we find that we want to stay alive forever, which means that we never actually live.